Welcome back to Truths of a Madman. Today, we're diving into a heavy but important topic. One that really makes you think about the kind of world we live in and the systems that control it. I'm going to be reacting to a video by Second Thought called, "Is the US a police state?" It's a question that honestly a lot of people might not even want to ask, because it forces us to look straight at the reality of our so-called freedom, what it really means to live under a system built on surveillance, control, and fear. Over the past few years, we've seen protests, police militarization, mass incarceration, and more surveillance than ever before, all justified in the name of security or safety, but at what cost? I want to react to this video not just to echo the ideas, but to really unpack them, to look at the roots of this kind of control, how it ties back to capitalism, to power, keeping people divided and obedient. Because if we want to understand where we're headed as a society, we have to be honest about where we already are. So grab a drink, settle in, and let's get into it. Second Thought. This is a video, like I said, by Second Thought. Is the US a police state? And let's see what we can uncover together.
Second Thought is a 100% viewer-funded operation. If you'd like to help support the channel and get some great perks while you're at
Second Thought is
consider
awesome.
becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought.
By the way,
Protest against the war in Gaza.
Arrests in New York City.
Students clashing with police.
Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling has a direct message to those that plan to protest.
Peaceful protest does not necessarily mean that someone is exercising their First Amendment rights.
okay, so first off, obviously, this country, the United States, is a police state. And that is because we are an imperialist country. We practice imperialist actions. We think that we are in control of the world and we are the boss, so to speak. And because of that, and because of the class struggle, the ruling class, which is the primary antagonist part of the contradiction, right? The ruling class, the bourgeoisie, because of that, they need to protect their interests. And as Lenin said in State and Revolution, to be able to protect their interests and to be able to protect the state against the majority of people that are working class, they need to have a military and a police locally. So, of course, we're a police state, I mean, simply put, but, here on this video, Second Thought, JT is going to give us a little more detail. But I mean, if you want to keep it real simple, look at it from a materialist, a dialectical materialist position and analysis. And if you're a Marxist, then that's what you would do. Then yeah, obviously the United States is a police state. So here we go.
First Amendment protection is only there if you're not committing a crime. And you can be acting out peacefully, but still breaking the law. So
How is
if
that?
you block a roadway or you block a venue or you're on private property and you refuse to leave, those are crimes.
See, to me, that is such a the democracy of the bourgeoisie, kind of liberal, or not even liberal. It's just the democracy of the bourgeoisie viewpoint. He's saying basically that you only have freedom if you don't break the law, even if it's peaceful. So, you're protesting against something and seizing the means of production like we need to do, like blocking a roadway to get power to push your movement, whatever it is, then they're saying that's illegal and they're allowed to use police force, which is an attack on our freedom, right? But we don't really have freedom. We just have freedom under, the ruling class has freedom. They have their democracy. The rest of us, the working class, which is the majority of the country and the world, for that matter, we don't have that freedom, So here we go. Oh, and another thing he said is, if you're doing anything to private property, we don't even want, as Marxists, as socialists, we don't even want there to be private property, personal property, of course, but private property, we want to get rid of that. So here we go.
This is not a tent city. This is New York City. It's our city. And if you're thinking about doing something like this, take a look around, see how fast we cleared it out. This could be you.
That is a threat.
Ready. What you've just heard are 2 audio clips from the last month or so. The first one's from Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling. In it, he's talking to reporters ahead of the DNC and spelling out in no uncertain terms his plan for protesters who break the law. The second one is from Tariq Shepard, Deputy Commissioner of Public Information for the NYPD. And in that clip, Shepard is standing on the west lawn of Columbia's campus, where the school's second Gaza Solidarity encampment was set up, on the night that hundreds of cops were invited for the second time by the university's president to violently crack down on pro-Palestine protesters after they occupied a school building.
That's so terrible.
If you've been on Twitter the last few months, you've maybe seen or heard one of these clips before. But outside of a few angry replies, neither of these statements really made it into the mainstream news. No controversy, no press releases to walk back the rhetoric, nothing. Cops talking like this is normal. Nobody is shocked when cops threaten protesters. Why would that be weird? Is the US a police state?
Yes.
I feel like we should talk about this violent suppression of dissent, because it's always been bad, and it's getting a lot worse. So the core feature of police states is the violent suppression of political dissent. If you've been to a protest recently, you already know it can be a bit unnerving to attend. And that's a bad thing in a country where free speech is meant to be protected. Every major protest since the 2020 BLM movement has come with the same recommendations. Wear non-identifiable clothing, wear a mask at all times, turn off your phone, and have someone's number written on your arm in case you get arrested. At every protest, you can be certain you're being surveilled by security cameras and police drones.
So he's saying that you should, if you're going to go protest, you should expect to get arrested or worse, which is so ridiculous, especially, in my opinion, the Palestine genocide going on. People that are protesting and that are calling out and challenging the status quo, the narrative that's the genocide in Gaza by the illegal occupation and settler colonialism of Israel in Palestine. Anybody that's speaking out about that is just caring about humans, because it's an awful atrocity. So to be able to have to worry that you're going to get violently put down because you're challenging that is a fucking disaster, It's terrible, the place that we're in, right?
You'll usually have dozens of cops surrounding the area, watching you, resting their hand on a stack of zip tie cuffs or putting on riot gear, and just patiently waiting for the call to come in to start locking people up. This is a general state of affairs we've gotten used to, and it's getting worse. We're seeing more and more obvious examples of the US doing everything in its power to increase police surveillance capacities and silence the opposition.
We need to push back.
Cops have gotten wise to the safety measures protesters have adopted, and in recent weeks we've seen the mayor of New York explicitly trying to ban the use of masks in public because of their use by pro-Palestine protesters. Masks are just a good public health measure, especially for immunocompromised people. But according to Eric Adams, quote, "You should not be able to wear a mask at protests because, quote, that's what cowards do." Back in April, the Supreme Court similarly made it clear that for Louisiana, Mississippi, and right here in Texas where I live, mass protests are functionally illegal. by refusing to hear a case that makes protest organizers financially liable for any illegal act that happens at a protest, like if some bad actor shows up and starts throwing rocks, the Supreme Court has decided to up the risks for protest organizers in a major way. As we've seen with protests against the Israeli genocide of Palestinians, it's all too common for outside agitators to start trouble. This new ruling makes it that much easier for genocide enjoyers or corporate goons to get peaceful protests shut down, in addition to framing the organizers for the crime. Of course, over the past 3 months or so, we've also seen around 3,000 students get arrested across the country for calling for the end of the US's and their schools' complicity in the Palestinian genocide.
Keep pushing back.
Hundreds more non-students have been arrested at the Israeli consulate, the Brooklyn Museum, the French Quarter in New Orleans, a Senate building in DC, and at dozens of other protests around the country for the same thing. At a lot of these crackdowns, we've seen literal armies of cops decked out in full riot gear meet peaceful protesters.
Oh yeah, so that's the other thing he just reminded me of. You know what? Especially the major cities, or at least some of the major cities, they get surplus equipment from the military to, like a grant or whatever it might be to their department. So they have military gear for these riots. I mean, it's unbelievable, dude. Here we go.
With less than lethal ammunition, throw them down flights of stairs, beat them up, and assault them with pepper spray and mace, to name just a few of their crimes. At Hinds Hall, the building Columbia students occupied, what little footage we have of the police raid shows cops using flashbangs against students, going room to room with their guns drawn, and as far as we know, firing at least one shot.
Unbelievable.
Now, thankfully, the bullet didn't hit anyone, but that doesn't mean these crackdowns were without consequences. Students, professors, and other protesters have been hospitalized with fractured eye sockets, concussions, broken ribs and hands, and all the while cops have publicly denied these injuries and their use of excessive violence more generally. In the aftermath of these crackdowns, dozens of student protesters from Columbia, CCNY, Penn, Stanford, and other schools have also been charged with felonies and misdemeanors that, in some cases, might land them in jail for up to 9 years.
Oh my God.
And when I list these things out like this, it seems almost exceptional. Like we're in some special time where everybody overreacted for a second. And that's very much the language we're hearing from the mainstream press and people in charge.
I mean, yeah, that's what it seems like.
In her public statements, Columbia's president called her decision to invite the NYPD to attack her students a, quote, extraordinary step because these are extraordinary circumstances.
Oh my God,
nothing about this is actually unique. All these protests have done is drag the dark, ugly root of the US's carceral ideology into the mainstream news. So this video isn't...
So hold on, she called on the police to use violence against her students? Oh my God, how awful that person is. Anyway, here we go.
About the stereotypical police state thing. There's no single agreed upon definition of a police state, and it's more of an edgy label you use for shock value more than anything else.
Yeah.
That said, here's a pretty good definition if you're interested. Now, I'm not going to focus on checking off the details of this definition. I don't want to spend too much time on how we've rebranded secret police as plainclothes officers here in the US when they randomly pulled BLM protesters into unmarked vans. Nor am I going to do 15 minutes on the depths of the national security state, COINTELPRO, or the Patriot Act. That'll get its own video at some point, and I'll leave a few sources in the description for those who can't wait.
Yeah, that's all. That's
you can definitely make a case for an American police state using that definition I just showed you. That's just not what we're doing today. This video is exclusively about the police of it all. The American carceral state, its logic, and how that logic becomes all-consuming in moments of mass political upheaval like we're seeing today. Because while the vast network of surveillance that we all know about represents an extreme of state control, it's probably less powerful in practice than the everyday commitment of the American state.
Well, I mean, just to say it again, in State and Revolution, Lenin laid it out why the ruling class needs to protect their interests, and this is how they do it with prisons, the military, or for wars abroad, to push imperialism to other nations, and then the police for local right? So this is how they protect their terrible exploitation that they're doing to the American people and to the working class. So it's why it's there. For us to be able to change this, we need to organize, be disciplined, have a mass movement, a revolution, and we need to throw down we need to seize the means of production, right? It's been laid out for us in theory, and it's been put into practice through history. We need to follow these examples, right? That's how we can get rid of this stuff. So here we go.
To law and order, especially now under a strained neoliberal capitalism. So let me start with this. Policing here is extreme. The US is unquestionably one of the most policed states in the world.
So many prisons here.
You've probably already heard that the US has more people in jail and prison than any other country.
Here you go.
But that doesn't actually capture the full scale of things. About 1 in 100 people in the US is behind bars right now.
Man.
2.3 million people. More prisoners than 194 other countries combined.
Wow.
And there's only like 200 countries out there. The US on its own holds a fifth of all the prisoners on Earth. Our police are also far more violent. Per year, they kill about 1,000 people. The second place among wealthy countries is Canada, and Canadian cops kill about 30. Not only are US police killing more, there's also zero accountability for this violence. According to Human Rights Watch, about 98% of police killings in the US never result in officers being charged with a crime. And still, year after year, Democrats and Republicans alike talk about how great and valuable our cops are. Biden signs the American Rescue Plan, and cops all over the country get $350 billion to hire more police officers, get more overtime pay and bonuses, and get decked out in the latest military gear.
Yeah,
that means tiny towns like Prosper, Texas, not too far from here, truly one of the most boring, uneventful places I know, has beat cops riding in $700,000 10-foot tall armored trucks.
Oh my God.
Now, $350 billion is hard to grasp. Here it is in a more manageable format. What you're looking at are what's called million-dollar blocks. Places in the country, usually in big cities, where single blocks get over $1 million spent on incarceration alone per year. And think about where you live right now. Think about what would happen if every year the city decided to spend $1 million on making your block better.
Right.
Whether that's renovations, upgrades,
fixing
new
roads,
businesses, events, or just gave you and your neighbors a couple $1,000 extra bucks each to spend on your home. That's not what's happening. Housing. In America's poorest and blackest neighborhoods, the budget doesn't go towards making things better. It's huge, and it goes towards throwing people away. This is the carceral logic of the American capitalist system. And here's how it works. Under the neoliberal version,
so instead of making it better for the disenchanted, for the minority, for the people, the homeless, for the guy that works paycheck to paycheck, instead of making life better for all of us, they decide to just incarcerate, push into certain neighborhoods, basically, like you said, throw away, so that they can keep what they have and continue to build on their capital to just keep their status quo. Isn't that awful? Like how could anybody not see how this is just so backwards, and it needs to, it's the contradictions are so sharp, it cannot continue. I mean, how could anybody not see this, unless you're trying to protect your interests because you're one of these people that one of these capitalists that want to continue the way that things are. I don't get it. So my rant is over. Here we go.
version of capitalism we've had in the US since Reagan, government policy has looked something like
neoliberalism.
this. Every administration makes
shot
people
this,
more vulnerable by cutting social and public services, refusing to raise the minimum wage, pushing back the age of retirement, defunding things like the NLRB to weaken unions, and deepening government deficits not for anything useful, but to increase incarceration, policing, military spending, and private deregulation. It's how you get graphs like these and cops that look like this. The neoliberal mantra is that you make things better for businesses by pulling the rug out from organized labor, making endless calls for everyone to become an entrepreneur, more cops, and forcing people to take on more debt, either through student loans or credit cards. People need to pay this debt back, and to do that, you work longer hours, at worse jobs, for lower real wages in a society that, year after year, increases the pool of people who can't afford an unexpected $500 hospital bill.
Like I say, the contradictions
Thanks
just
to
get sharper and
outsourcing,
sharper.
automation, and leaner business practices geared towards maximizing stock prices, there are fewer real, non-gig jobs, and more people need to work 2 or 3 of them to get by. At the same time, more and more privatized services, like housing, also means things like rent keep increasing. And just like that, you've created widespread poverty and insecurity with fewer solutions to escape it and more dire consequences for those who can't. But that's not enough. Managing this widespread insecurity that's so beneficial for capitalist accumulation is difficult without conceding any ground to activists and organized workers. So it starts being in the state's interest to redefine our concept of crime and apply it more broadly to the state's targets so it can manage this situation. People don't usually love that their needs aren't being met no matter what they do, and they might start getting the funny idea that upsetting this status quo, taking back control, and redistributing wealth and power more fairly is a good thing. They could start organizing, imposing demands on their bosses, taking charge of their neighborhoods themselves, or just trying their best to get on an equal footing with those born into privilege. That sort of behavior, the more it starts threatening the stability and negative peace of this violent system, needs to become labeled as irrational and criminal so it can be justifiably repressed to protect the exclusive entitlements of a few. So now media organizations, both news and entertainment, government bodies, courts, and politicians start moving the goalposts on what they consider crime. And upholding this system, exploiting work.
Oh yeah, and obviously that's a big one. I forgot to mention the mass media. You know, the capitalists use that for sure to try to confuse or push under the rug or totally lie about what's really going on. And if you only watch that, then you have nothing else to, you know, base your material reality off of, right? So don't do that. If you're going to watch mass media, like, realize that there's a lot of garbage there that you got to sift through if you want to, like, know your enemy or however you want to put it. But so that's a big part of all of this, right? So here we go.
Workers, keeping people exposed to the daily violence of not having enough, that's not part of their definition. The FBI's crime statistics aren't about the number of people suddenly thrown in cages by the state after yet another new crime bill. Nor does the report include what white-collar criminals get up to when they slowly rob millions of people of their retirement savings.
They're bigger criminals.
No, the label crime is exclusively applied to things like petty theft, armed robbery, property destruction, homicide, and all these other crimes of opportunity that are inevitable when people's needs are being denied to them. To aid in this effort, context gets completely steamrolled by liberal concepts of equal justice and the introduction of more rational criminal procedures like mandatory minimums. We trust retail companies when they broadcast that petty theft is on the rise. Crime rates are presented as objective reflections of reality to the public, decontextualized from the increased level of policing. And the predictable result is that criminal sentencing procedures systematically reaffirm the capitalist hierarchy. Some groups get charged with more severe crimes and more jail time. But because this system has been rationalized, because the concept of crime has been crafted around this specific purpose, and because the context of the state's control over people's livelihoods is treated as a completely separate question, none of this gets challenged. Politicians always get to ask for more cops, more prisons, and more guns. Because, after all, The crime numbers don't lie.
They have to protect
Crime
their interests.
control becomes the regulation of a relatively small number of acts that have been designated as threatening the social order, and the administration of criminal justice becomes the institutionalized or patterned responses for processing those threats.
And one other thing, I'm sure most people realize by now, but maybe some don't. This isn't just a conservative or a liberal situation. You know what I mean? This isn't just Republican or the MAGA or Democrat. This is not just one or the other. So what I'm trying to say is it's not like one administration in the U.S. is going to come in and cause this kind of life for all of us, and then a new one from the Democrat administration is going to come in after and make it better, right? It doesn't work like that. It's all in their best interest. It's all in the ruling class best interest, whether it's right, left, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm kind of dancing around what I'm trying to say, but this is a systematic, there you go. This is a systematic problem. It's not just Republican, Democrat. It's not that at all. So just know that the only way to make this better is to throw down the capitalist system and move into a socialist system. All right. So here we go.
This way of criminal justice functioning becomes accepted and normalized. Ideologies, legal and otherwise, convince people that the patterns are inevitable and just.
Like
to
there's
make
nothing
this
else.
project of criminalization especially successful, our leaders rely on crime as a tool for othering along racial, gendered, sexual, and class lines, to the point that this othering comes to justify just about anything.
Yeah, they pick out
It structures
minorities.
the capitalist hierarchy, lends legitimacy to those whose privileges allow them a higher standing than those who are othered, and enables the violence of more extreme policing against some. They shift the explanation for bigoted state repression away from the structural factors that make some groups' disempowerment profitable, and towards rooting out the bad apples from this perfectly neutral enforcement of law and order. Some people's identities and their efforts to live equal lives to
They
the
have all
privileged
of the
become
control and
synonymous
power.
with
We need
crime.
to take the power back.
And once that criminality is established and ingrained,
We need to seize the means of
anything
production
and
to take the
everything
power.
is allowed. Cops can never go too far in punishing these obvious criminals, terrorists, communists, and those people who are branded as definitionally violent. The result is a system in which the solution to every social ill becomes the police. We throw cops at homelessness, mental health crises, poverty, and fare evasion while demanding that public schools, public
And it just
transportation,
makes it
and
worse.
entire communities get by with much less than enough. And you can very clearly see the inevitable consequences when protests start getting in the way of this capitalist society's goals. At around midnight on April 30th,
You know what? At least now we have social media and the phones. People can record what goes on. At least it helps a little bit for, the truth, what's really going on to come out. Because before that, people could just watch the news, and that's what they had. So, at least we got that going for us. That helps.
a group of Columbia students occupied Hamilton Hall in an act of protest against the university's involvement and investment in the Israeli apartheid state and the genocide of Palestinians. 4 days earlier, former NYPD captain and current mayor of New York, Eric Adams, was on a Zoom call with a group of heavily invested billionaires. On that call, according to WhatsApp chat logs filled with dozens of Forbes 100 capitalists, this group discussed the various ways that they could leverage their tremendous wealth, influence, and connections to help Adams in his crackdown of student protests. They talked about making campaign donations to the Adams Re-election Fund, hiring private investigators, putting pressure on the
Yeah, so they have the means, you know what I mean? They have the means. That's the hard part, is they can throw a lot of money, a lot of resources at these kinds of things to squash them and to make them disappear. That's why we have to seize the means. I know I keep going down that road, but I mean, that's the only way. And just to say this as well, everybody at this point should be supporting the free state of Palestine and should be supporting Palestinians and should be supporting, the ceasefire completely for good of Israel from doing what they're doing. This needs to stop. So I just wanted to put that in there because, he's talking a lot about protests of Palestine. So here we go.
Columbia administration, whatever it would take to get police officers to handle protesters. At the same time, a narrative began to take hold of mainstream media that this occupation and the escalation of protest it represented in response to an administration unwilling to accept students' demands was a step too far. What they were doing was labeled by pundits across the political spectrum as a violent crime. And now that the protesters were criminals, nothing could protect them.
That's awful.
So let me
turn
be
it
clear.
into that.
Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None.
See how they use that, the private property thing, as like if there's anything, you're trespassing on private property, then they can use that to say that you're not doing peaceful protest, and they can commit violence against you. So it's such a shitty thing to do, like especially when it comes to protesting for something that's that is good for humanity.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
You can't convince me that a university with a $13 billion endowment cares about a single broken window.
Right?
That's not what this is about. And it's certainly not violence. There wasn't a single bloody nose or broken rib until the cops showed up.
Yeah, the cops started the violence.
It's an excuse. A line in the sand that justified hundreds of police officers' flashbangs and arrests, the condemnation of a president standing firmly behind a genocidal occupation, and the pearl clutching of the corporate media. Law and order had been restored. Protesters' criminality had justified it. It justified the press and legal observers not being allowed to document the police's actions, which still today we only have a partial account of. It justified the cops forcefully removing students' hijabs. It justified all the expulsions and the concussions. Suddenly, it wasn't about Palestine anymore. It was about cracking down on inconvenience.
It's terrible.
And in the days that followed, it justified dozens of bogus misdemeanor and felony charges for trespassing, property damage, burglary, and assault, not unlike the RICO charges brought against Stop Cop City protesters in Atlanta. Here again, the consequences of the racial capitalist state came out in full force. The wealthier and more mediatized Columbia protesters saw their mostly misdemeanor charges dropped relatively quickly. Down the road at CCNY, protesters saw the same violent crackdown as their peers 20 minutes away. But CCNY is a public school. Its students and faculty largely come from lower income Black and Hispanic families. And so at the time of writing, the CUNY 22 are still dealing with felony charges that could put them away for years.
That's terrible just because they're
and as student protesters
minority.
continue to remind us, all of this pales in comparison to the violence
because
imposed
they're
on
not rich.
Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. But it's related. So, is the US a police state?
Yes.
It's a matter of opinion. But I think the message the ruling class and their militarized police are sending is pretty clear. They're not hiding it.
No, you're right.
And if you're thinking about doing something like this, take a look around, see how fast we cleared it out. This could be you.
The threat, definitely.
I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that this channel is entirely
All right, so we're gonna stop there. That was great. Love Second Thoughts content. Go check them out. I'll put the link in the description of this video to this particular video, and then you can get access to Second Thought if you don't. It's just on YouTube, obviously. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope I didn't ramble and rant too much, but this stuff is very serious to me, and I hope that we can make a better world. There is a better world possible. I'm telling you. Workers of the world unite.